here, and today we're going to be talking about tape. Someone asked me, like, hey, what's the deal with this tape thing? They wanted to know, like, how can I use it in music? What does it really mean for tape? So tape, we just have to remember a couple fundamental things about tape. First, it's a physical medium. It's continuous. It's a continuous signal, meaning it's a line. And in digital audio, things are just at points, and we can affect these points using math. With tape, it's not the same way. We have a continuous signal, so we need to use, in this case, we're using a machine. If we picture, like, here's like a strip of tape. When someone was first explaining tape to me, I was like, what the heck is with this tape thing? Because we were actually working with a tape machine. It was pretty rad. But anyways, we had this tape, right? And it's incredibly expensive now to get good tape. But you had this tape. It was made up a bunch of layers of stuff. We're not going to worry about that. But basically, you could picture this tape having a bunch of itty-bitty magnets on it. And all these little magnets have a plus and a minus. I don't know what I am doing with the hand gestures, but I feel like they help. So we have this tape, a bunch of magnets, and this plus or minus. Well, when these magnets are pointed in all random directions, you know, plus is over there, minus is over there, the one in between is pointing down, like it's all unrelated, it becomes silent to us. It's basically noise. It's totally random. There's nothing on our tape. No meaningful information. And then as soon as we organize this, we line it up so that it's plus minus, plus minus, plus minus in a way that makes us see or something like that. In reality, we're recording vibrations from a microphone, or our microphone's moving back and forth, creating variations in voltage, and then we put that on the tape, and it causes these magnetic fields to line up, and we have audio, and it's an incredible deal. But all we've basically done, we could take that whole thing and say we've just organized the magnets, and we call them the domains. We've organized the direction these poles are in, and so we've now got audio. So we have this interesting idea about that. Now, what if we wanted to erase what was on our tape? Well, you would take a very high frequency and bombard it. A frequency that is just too much for our tape to handle. It just had a meltdown. And it would just randomize our frequencies and we were good to go. We called that biasing. Now, a lot of plugins will mention this in some form or another. Usually it's a reference to some sort of distortion. And so it's not really like, it's kind of an interesting deal, like how they implement it. But anyways, biasing originally. And so because originally we had an issue with when we erased tape, we would erase it in ways that would cause problems when we would record again. And so we came up with this other method. So there were different ways to bias, different frequencies. And if you ever have had to calibrate a tape machine, it's this crazy ordeal. Okay, the other thing is tape, right? It's a physical medium running through physical parts. So what happens if the tape slows up or slows down or speeds up during a different part? We're going to get pitch variations, and it can happen at different parts of our machine. And this pitch variation has a couple names depending on where in our machine it happened, because that just happens to be the result it produces. One is called wow, the other is called flutter. And one affects the low end and one affects the high end. The one that affects the low end will affect our pitch more because we use the fundamental frequency, the lowest frequency of a sound to determine what its pitch is. So one we generally consider as a type of distortion, and the other we consider more of like this timbral change because it affects the higher frequencies, which we use to indicate timbre rather than pitch. So most plugins are going to be using various parts of this. And remember, all of this is linked to how fast our tape is going through our machine. And so a lot of plugins will have different speed settings, and they're usually based on a piece of gear. And all you need to know is you're essentially, when you impart these controls, so this low and high emphasis can sort of be looked at as sort of like wow and flutter. Bias is if you read their description, it's a nonlinear distortion thing. Nonlinear just means, right, we're dealing with tape. And I have this horrible thing of thinking everyone is into calculus now because I think of functions immediately. But basically, if I put something in my plugin, it's going to spit out a result. If I go over a little bit, something that's linear would be a line. So we'd be able to say, oh, it will like increase by this much. But in this case, let me plot a wave shaper. Okay, let's just plot a wave shaper. It'll be easier to just show you. Okay, so here, this is linear, right? This is a line. Nonlinear means they do stuff like this. Maybe this is going on. This is the plugin wouldn't be doing this. It wouldn't be this extreme. But anyways, yeah, nonlinear. It's not aligned. This is actually piecewise. So it's not really fair to say that either. But anyways, the point is it's a complicated deal. So yeah, anyways, nonlinear. So this is nonlinear, and all I'm trying to say is that when you give it the various things, maybe you give it a clarinet sound, that clarinet's going to change in volume, and it's going to have a very complicated relationship depending on your settings here. Each setting is probably, I can't speak for every plugin, but in a lot of cases when they're emulating something, they depend on other settings. I know speed changes a lot of things. So let's go ahead. Let's look at a couple audio examples where this stuff takes place. So let me get rid of the wave shaper before, oh my goodness. Okay. All right. So first let's do a sine wave. And what we're going to do is, oh, we also have input drive, right? I take this sort of just as like, how hard are you recording to tape? Affects the gain of the input signal prior to tape emulation. Oh, there you have it. It's the gain before. Basically just like an input, like how hard are you going to push it onto the tape? You can view it as that. So those are some of the fundamental aspects. Basically, now you can look at this and you can say, okay, well, these harmonics are going to add more harmonics to our sound. So let's go ahead. Let's play a note. And you notice we already have some. What is the deal with that? Well, that's our bias. And it's a nonlinear thing. So as we change it, and you also have to keep in mind, we're looking at a logarithmic display. This will get a little more interesting when we introduce a more complicated signal. Let's go ahead. Let's introduce the harmonic knob. And you notice we're getting a slight saw wave series out of a sine wave, which is an interesting result. As I increase the bias, we see that it goes away. And so there's this interplay of relationships. Now here, I'll be thinking, like when I'm using it, you're like, whoa, do you like have all this stuff going in your head? Well, yeah, sort of in the background, but largely it's like I want my sound to sound a little thicker. And right now you might be going, ooh, a saw wave out of a sine wave? That doesn't sound that great. You got to keep in mind when you give it a complicated signal with fluctuating signals, it's going to be more of a feeling. The response is going to be very complicated. And so if it sounds like something you are interested in, then go for it. This isn't something I typically will use on like EDM or anything like that. If I wanted to sound old, maybe it's a hip hop track, then I'll pull it out. I'm much more likely to use something like this. Okay, let's go ahead. Let's give it a triangle wave. We notice that the series basically just disappears. And if you follow my critical listening series, I talk a little bit about the different forms of masking. And here, these harmonics are largely being masked, but they anyways, but they have a feeling they bring up, like a presence, but it's not something that's like necessarily heard all the way. That's the way emulations like this tend to be. They add that thing to it, but you're not quite sure. And a lot of the times is because a lot of it actually gets masked out when you're listening to it. Let's bring our input drive up a little bit. Another thing about the input drive, if we just brought everything down, is check it out. It'll look more like a square wave. Tape saturation will favor odd harmonics. There's actually like reasons, but the reasons aren't dislikes. That's like a whole nother story. But let's go ahead. Let's bring this up. So yeah, just a pretty interesting deal. So tape saturation, that just tends to be the way that it is. Something to take note of is I've actually been in stereo for this period of time. If we take it to mono, our results actually sound super different. And besides the fact that I'm using a pitch variation here to accomplish this, we get the way a plugin will process mono versus stereo is like just light years apart. They're totally different. So you need to just be aware of that. And whenever you're testing out a plug, get a feeling for both. If we increase the speed, we can now sort of mess with this low and high emphasis. Let's go down a couple octaves. And let's check out what happens when I bring up the harmonics. So we get a little bit more action, and this will give us a little more control. The harmonics knob is sort of like a lever knob to let us get at the low end and the high end. So this is like we could view this sort of as more as a distortion, or in this case, this is more like an EQ curve. And you can see these are very subtle effects, and I'm showing you static examples. It's as if we were playing a sound and then we stopped it and froze it at a picture of that sample instead of playing through the whole video. And so you can imagine the complicated relationship that would result. It's like pausing a video to look at a specific effect you applied, but then when you play the whole video, the effect takes on a whole new character because you're looking at it as a whole. So let's look at low, high emphasis. This one's pretty easily audible. I'm not sure how well it's going to come across on YouTube, but you can hear it pretty clearly, that high end buzz. And then if we slow it down, it's like someone put like a small low pass on it it's not as brilliant as it was here. So anyways, that's tape emulation. You're going to see a lot of these. If you see wild flutters, probably going to be something sort of similar to this, maybe a little more severe. And it will also cause pitch variations, which are a big part of this. So sometimes if this isn't doing it for me and I want it to sound friggin' old, I will grab a plugin. It's free. That last one was definitely not free, but this one's free. It's called, it's by Isotope Vinyl. Now, it's not tape emulation. I know I'm going to hear that. What the heck? How do you spell vinyl? Vinyl. V-I-N-Y-L. I don't know why I was thinking there was an A in there. Okay, anyways, drop it down. So it is indeed a... but this is vinyl, but it is it's a similar deal because it's running through mechanical processes. So we'll also experience wow, and similar problems. So here we have a warp depth. Check it out. And then different degrees of filtering. So if we were to add in, like, I don't know, let's grab a string sound. Let's open up a contact. So this is like just a standard contact string ensemble. So you can already hear it doing its thing. We'll put down just a couple of notes here. I could explain to you DSP on like how you could achieve similar things, but I won't bore you to death right now. So, okay, there's like our pitch variation that we're looking for, right? And then we're like, okay, let's bring our input drive up. It should also be noted when I'm working, I should be doing this from the start, maybe. The explanation was pretty necessary, though. But when I'm working, you know, I realize there's going to be degrees of filtering that are going to go on. Things are going to cancel. A bunch of masking is going to take place. All contributes to the sound, as well as a bunch of phasing. So on this sound, I don't want low emphasis, right? I don't want to look at the low end. Well, actually, maybe it might add a nice mellow tone to it. So let's bring up the harmonics just to give a little more meat to work with. Now, I like that, but we can check out the high emphasis too. And you can actually hear it's actually quite a positive thing on this sound if we were to remove it. Now let's put it back. You can also hear there's a bit of noise, so maybe not as much. Yep. Compensate high frequency loss induced by reproduction tape head. So they give like reasons for every knob. So let's go ahead and turn that off. See what it sounds like before. Let's turn the vinyl off too real quick so we can hear what exactly Ozone's doing. So let's bypass it. All right, now we'll unbypass it. And so these are pretty subtle effects. Let's go ahead, let's get something a little more extreme. So this is, as you can see here, we're getting more of a square wave type vibe, but it adds we begin to focus in sort of on the lower end. We could change the speed. That often, for this sound, maybe bringing down the high emphasis and having a lower speed, that'll cause our sound, right, to sound a little more mid-rangey. What a technical term that is. Now, of course, this over here, probably just chop that off with like an EQ or something. Just go, or I don't, where's the filter? Do we have filters? Analog, high pass. High pass. We want a brick wall. All right. Look at that. And then we'll turn on vinyl. Perhaps not that. Let's go to 2000 warp. And so we've accomplished sort of a lo-fi sound. We've reduced it. But anyways, that's tape saturation. That's how I'll typically look at using it. If I'm adding a general feel to a track, I might use the harmonic knob a little bit with the intention to influence dynamics or something later on. Maybe it's getting a little high-end and I'm like, oh, I can get around this by increasing the drive a bit and bringing up the high emphasis knob and doing various things of that nature. Typically, since Ozone's intended for mastering, that's why you don't see like wow and flutter and knobs of that nature. But for plugins that are meant to do that, you'll see, maybe a little more in-depth controls. Maybe they'll even reference specific parts and like how they would work. So I hope this was useful. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.